October 14th, 1943, 5 miles above Schweinfurt, Germany. Inside the cramped cockpit of his Focke-Wulf 190, a German fighter pilot watches another American fortress tumble from the sky. Black smoke trails behind it like a funeral shroud. His gloved hand makes another mark in his logbook. Number 17. Around him, the surviving B-17s struggle to hold formation. Their gunners fire desperately at empty sky, 50 caliber tracers arcing uselessly where German fighters had been seconds before. The mathematics are simple, brutal, final. The German fighters can choose when to strike, where to strike, and when to disappear. The American bombers can only absorb punishment and hope to survive. 291 flying fortresses had entered German airspace that morning. Their target, the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt. By nightfall, 60 would be scattered across the German countryside in burning wreckage. Another 17 would limp back to England, so badly damaged they'd never fly again. The Luftwaffe called it a turkey shoot. The Americans called it Black Thursday, the darkest day in the history of the 8th Air Force. What neither side understood in that moment was that this German triumph would be among their last. Within 4 months, the entire equation of aerial warfare would be rewritten. The hunters would become the hunted. The laughter would turn to silence, and it would all change because of a single aircraft that nobody saw coming. The German pilots of late 1943 had every reason for confidence. Men like Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, Hauptmann Georg Peter Eder, and Major Walter Dahl had turned bomber interception into a science of destruction. They'd studied the American formations, identified their weaknesses, and developed tactics that exploited every vulnerability. The standard American combat box placed 18 to 21 bombers in a 3-dimensional defensive pattern. The theory was elegant. Overlapping fields of fire from 1350 caliber machine guns per bomber would create an impenetrable shield of lead. Any fighter attempting an attack would fly into a storm of bullets. In practice, German pilots had found the cracks in the armor. Hauptmann Heinz Knocker, commanding 5th Staffel, Jagdgeschwader 11, had perfected the head-on attack. Approach from 12 o'clock high. Dive through the formation at 400 miles per hour. Fire a 2-second burst at the cockpit and engines. Break away before the top turret gunners can track you. On February 26, 1943, he'd shot down his first heavy bomber, a B-24 Liberator named Maisie. By October, he'd destroyed 16 more. The statistics supported German confidence. During the first Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission on August 17, 1943, they'd shot down 60 bombers, 16% of the attacking force. American losses were so catastrophic that deep penetration raids were suspended for weeks. When they resumed with the second Schweinfurt raid on October 14th, the results were even more devastating. 77 bombers lost or written off. Over 600 airmen killed or captured in a single day. Major Gerhard Schöpfel, commanding 3rd Gruppe, Jagdgeschwader 26, had developed the company front attack. 8 Focke-Wulf 190s approaching line abreast, saturating the bombers' defensive fire with multiple simultaneous targets. American gunners, faced with 8 fighters approaching at a combined closing speed of 600 miles per hour, had seconds to choose targets. Most shot at nothing in their panic. But the root of American vulnerability wasn't tactics. It was physics. No Allied fighter in 1943 had the range to escort bombers deep into Germany. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, The primary American escort fighter had a combat radius of only 375 miles with drop tanks, enough to reach the German border, no further. The twin-engine Lockheed P-38 Lightning could fly farther, but suffered catastrophic mechanical problems at high altitude in the European cold. Engines failing, controls freezing, pilots dying. This limitation created what the Germans called the golden moment. That point where Allied fighters, their fuel gauges dropping, had no choice but to turn back toward England. And the moment those escorts disappeared over the horizon, the Luftwaffe pounced. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, who would claim 206 victories before his death in October 1943, described the tactic in his combat reports. "We track the bomber streams on radar, calculating exactly where their escorts will turn back. The moment the little friends leave, we attack with everything. The bombers know what's coming. You can see them tighten their formations." The escort limitation created deadly arithmetic. A B-17 formation might face 4 hours of combat over enemy territory, but only 90 minutes with fighter protection. German fighters could attack, land, refuel, rearm, and attack the same raid again. Some Luftwaffe pilots flew 3 or 4 sorties against a single bomber stream, multiplying their effectiveness. The Americans were trapped in a killing ground of their own making. They could reach the targets, they could bomb the targets, but the losses were unsustainable. Something had to change. The P-51 Mustang's development began not in America, but in England. In April 1940, with the Battle of Britain approaching, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American aviation with a desperate request. They needed more fighters, specifically more P-40 Warhawks. North Americans' response was audacious. Instead of building someone else's fighter, they proposed designing and building an entirely new aircraft in just 120 days. The result was the NA-73X, a sleek, low-wing fighter that first flew on October 26, 1940. A remarkable achievement in rapid development. But there was a problem. Powered by an Allison V1710 engine, the early Mustang excelled at low altitude, but struggled above 15,000 feet, precisely where bomber escort was needed. The RAF used these early variants for tactical reconnaissance and ground attack, roles where their exceptional range and low-altitude performance proved valuable. The transformation that would change everything came from an unlikely marriage of American and British engineering. In April 1942, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew an Allison-engined Mustang. He immediately recognized something the Americans had missed. The airframe was superb, aerodynamically cleaner than even the legendary Spitfire. What it needed was a better engine. Harker proposed fitting the Mustang with the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same 2-stage supercharged engine that powered the latest Spitfires. The first Merlin-powered Mustang flew in October 1942. The results were extraordinary. Maximum speed increased from 390 to 440 miles per hour. Service ceiling jumped from 31,000 to 42,000 feet. But more importantly, performance above 20,000 feet transformed from marginal to exceptional. The marriage of American mass production capability with British engine technology had created something neither nation could have achieved alone. What made the P-51B truly revolutionary wasn't just its performance, it was its range. The secret lay in 3 factors: exceptional aerodynamic efficiency from its laminar flow wing, internal fuel capacity of 184 gallons in a much lighter, more efficient airframe than the P-47, and the ability to carry external drop tanks without severe performance degradation. The laminar flow wing, designed by North Americans Edgar Schmood, maintained smooth airflow much farther back along its surface than conventional wings. This reduced drag by nearly 30%, translating directly into fuel efficiency. While a P-47 burned 100 gallons per hour in cruise flight, a P-51 consumed only 65 gallons at the same speed. When 75-gallon drop tanks were added to the P-51B in early 1944, combat radius extended to 650 miles. With 108-gallon tanks introduced in March 1944, radius stretched to 850 miles, enough to reach Berlin, engage in combat for 20 minutes, and return to England. No other single-engine fighter in the world could match this combination of range and performance. The equation of aerial warfare was about to be rewritten. The 354th Fighter Group, nicknamed the Pioneer Mustang Group, received the first P-51Bs in November 1943. Based at Boxted in Essex, their commander, Colonel Kenneth Martin, had just days to convert his pilots from P-47s to the new fighter. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Duncan, who would later command the 353rd Fighter Group, flew one of the first orientation flights. He later recalled, "The moment I lifted off, I knew we had something special. The Mustang handled like a sports car compared to the truck-like Thunderbolt. It was responsive, fast, and most importantly, it could fly forever." The first P-51B combat mission came on December 1st, 1943. A fighter sweep over Belgium and France. The first escort mission followed on December 5th to Amiens. A relatively short-range raid. 16 P-51Bs accompanied the bombers, more as a combat test than a full escort mission. They encountered no enemy fighters, but the mission proved the aircraft's basic suitability for high-altitude escort work. December 13th brought the first long-range escort mission to Kiel, 490 miles from base, previously impossible for Allied fighters. The psychological impact on both sides was immediate. German pilots intercepting what they expected to be unescorted bombers over northern Germany were shocked to encounter aggressive American fighters deep in Reich territory. The Luftwaffe controllers, monitoring radio traffic, couldn't believe the reports. "Confirm fighter types. American fighters, single engine, still with the bombers over Kiel. Impossible. Check your identification. It's confirmed. They're Americans, and they're not leaving." The final week of 1943 saw intensified operations as the 8th Air Force tested the Mustang's capabilities. On December 20th, P-51Bs escorted bombers to Bremen, claiming 3 German fighters without loss. The Luftwaffe, still adjusting to the new threat, continued using their standard tactics of waiting for escorts to leave, but the escorts weren't leaving. German pilots initially mistook the P-51B for the P-47 at a distance, expecting them to turn back at any moment. When the Mustangs continued east, past the P-47's maximum range, confusion turned to alarm. Major Klaus Mitusch, commanding 3rd Gruppe, Jagdgeschwader 26, recognized the strategic implications immediately. After landing from a December 30th interception, where Mustangs had pursued his fighters all the way to their landing approach, he reportedly told his pilots, "The air war has fundamentally changed. Our sanctuary no longer exists." But it was what happened in March 1944 that would shatter German confidence completely. March 4th, 1944. 25,000 feet above Brandenburg. Through scattered clouds below, the sprawling outline of Berlin is clearly visible. The capital of the Reich, the heart of Nazi Germany, the city that Hermann Göring had sworn would never see enemy aircraft. Above it, in perfect formation, fly 660 American heavy bombers, and surrounding them, weaving protective patterns through the sky, are scores of single-engine fighters bearing American markings. The first American fighter escort to Berlin represents more than a tactical achievement. It's a psychological demolition of German invincibility. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, has led his 3 squadrons of P-51Bs on the historic 1,100-mile round trip. The 4th Fighter Group received their P-51Bs on February 28, 1944, just 4 days ago. And now they've accomplished what German leadership deemed impossible. For the Luftwaffe pilots rising to intercept, the sight is incomprehensible. They'd been told Allied fighters could never reach Berlin. It was too far. Impossible for single-engine aircraft. Yet there they are, fresh and aggressive after flying 500 miles, while German defenders are the ones running low on fuel after just taking off. The combat that follows is savage. The Luftwaffe commits over 200 fighters to defend Berlin. But they face not exhausted bomber gunners, but fresh, eager Mustang pilots with altitude advantage and superior aircraft. The 4th Fighter Group alone claims 15 victories. More significantly, numerous German attacks on the bombers are broken up before they can press home. The mathematics of air combat have been reversed. The Americans now hold every advantage. For American pilots, the P-51B represents a revelation in fighter design. Captain Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group, who would become one of the war's top Mustang aces, described his first combat in the type. The Mustang gave us everything we dreamed of: speed to catch any German fighter, maneuverability to dogfight with them, and range to go anywhere the bombers went. The cockpit of a P-51B is cramped but efficiently designed. The pilot sits behind an inline engine that provides excellent forward visibility, unlike the radial-engined P-47 that blocks much of the forward view. Lieutenant Robert Johnson of the 352nd Fighter Group recalled the physical demands. 6 hours in a Mustang meant 6 hours on oxygen, above 10,000 feet, your mouth bone dry from the oxygen, your back aching from the parachute and dinghy pack you sat on, your neck sore from constantly swiveling to check for enemy fighters. But we had the capability to do the job. And that made all the difference. The appearance of Mustangs over Berlin triggered an immediate crisis in Luftwaffe High Command. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring initially refused to believe the reports. When confronted with proof, gun camera footage from German fighters clearly showing P-51s over the capital, he reportedly said, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." While this specific quote may be apocryphal, it captures the shock that German leadership experienced. The tactical implications were devastating. Every assumption about Reich defense had been based on the sanctuary of German airspace beyond escort range. Training fields, assembly areas, and aircraft factories had been located in central Germany, specifically because they were thought safe from fighter attack. Now, American fighters could strafe airfields near Prague, engage German fighters over Munich, escort bombers to any target in the Reich. Major Günther Rohl one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, recognized the strategic shift. The Mustang didn't just extend the bomber offensive, it transformed it. We could no longer choose when and where to fight. They brought the battle to us on their terms, whenever they wished. The Luftwaffe attempted various tactical responses. Sturmgruppen were formed, heavily armed and armored Focke-Wulf 190s, designed to break through fighter screens and attack bombers at close range. But these lumbering assault fighters were easy prey for nimble Mustangs. The Germans tried mass attacks, with entire Gruppen attacking simultaneously. But American fighters had the numbers and performance to counter even these desperate measures. February 20th to 25th, 1944, known as Big Week, demonstrated the transformed dynamics of the air war. The 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument against German aircraft production, with P-51s providing escort throughout. In 6 days, the Americans flew 3,300 bomber sorties and 3,673 fighter sorties. They lost 226 bombers, but claimed over 500 German fighters destroyed. More critically, the Luftwaffe lost irreplaceable pilots. The American strategy had shifted from simply bombing targets to actively seeking aerial combat. General James Doolittle, commanding the 8th Air Force, issued new orders in January 1944. Fighters were to seek out and destroy the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found, rather than staying close to the bombers. Captain John Godfrey of the 4th Fighter Group described the new aggressive tactics. We'd escort the bombers to the target, but once they dropped, we'd go looking for trouble. We'd dive to the deck, shoot up airfields, catch German fighters landing or taking off. The mathematics of attrition now favored the Allies overwhelmingly. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe lost 1,311 pilots. In February, 2,121. In March, 2,115. These losses included many irreplaceable expert pilots with years of combat experience. American losses, while significant, could be replaced by massive training programs, producing 11,000 new pilots monthly. The P-51 represented more than just extended range. It showcased American industrial and technological superiority. The K-14 computing gun sight, introduced in late 1944, gave Mustang pilots a significant advantage in deflection shooting. This gyroscopic sight automatically calculated lead based on range and rate of turn, dramatically improving accuracy. The Mustang's 650 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, while less powerful than German cannon, offered advantages in ammunition capacity and rate of fire. A P-51 carried 1,880 rounds total, enough for nearly 30 seconds of continuous fire. German fighters armed with cannon typically carried ammunition for less than 10 seconds of fire. In a prolonged dogfight, American pilots could afford to take shots German pilots couldn't. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's top aces with 220 victories, noted the qualitative difference. The Mustang was not just another fighter. It was a weapons system. Everything about it was optimized for its mission. We had excellent aircraft, but nothing that combined all elements so effectively. Behind the statistics lay human tragedy on an unprecedented scale. Young men on both sides, many barely out of their teens, fought desperate battles 6 miles above the earth, in temperatures of -50 degrees Fahrenheit. The lucky ones died instantly. Others endured horrific burns, traumatic amputations from cannon shells, or slow deaths in parachutes riddled with bullet holes. Lieutenant William Wisner of the 352nd Fighter Group shot down a Bf-109 on March 8, 1944, and watched its pilot bail out. His parachute opened, but he was on fire. I could see him trying to beat out the flames on his flight suit as he descended. There was nothing anyone could do. German pilot Walter Schuck of Jagdgeschwader 7 described the changing nature of combat. In 1943, we were knights of the air, jousting with bombers in something approaching fair combat. By 1944, we were being pursued relentlessly. Mustangs would follow us down to our airfields, circle overhead while we tried to land, then attack. There was no safety anywhere. The psychological toll was devastating. Luftwaffe pilots who had been confident in 1943 became increasingly fatalistic by mid-1944. Letters home, censored by German authorities but preserved in archives, revealed deepening despair. One pilot wrote in April 1944, "We take off knowing most of us won't return. The Americans are everywhere, always above us, always with more fuel, more ammunition." As spring turned to summer in 1944, the Mustang's range enabled a strategic campaign that would cripple the German war machine. The systematic destruction of oil production. Synthetic oil plants at Leuna, Pörlitz, and Brux, previously beyond escort range, now faced regular precision attacks with full fighter protection. The impact was catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. Aviation fuel production fell from 175,000 tons in April 1944 to 30,000 tons in July, and just 10,000 tons in September. Training flights were curtailed, then eliminated entirely. New pilots arrived at combat units with as few as 50 hours total flight time, compared to American pilots with 300 to 400 hours. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, commanding Jagdgeschwader 7, described the crisis. "We had the world's first operational jet fighter, the Me-262, capable of 540 miles per hour, but we could barely fuel them for combat missions. I watched helplessly as dozens of these superb aircraft sat idle while Mustangs roamed freely overhead." June 6, 1944, D-Day, demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority. The Luftwaffe managed only 319 sorties over France, compared to 14,674 Allied sorties. Only 2 German fighters appeared over the invasion beaches. Mustangs and other Allied fighters had established such dominance that the invasion proceeded under an aerial umbrella, virtually unchallenged by German aviation. Oberstleutnant Josef Pips Priller, commanding Jagdgeschwader 26, flew one of those 2 sorties with his wingman, Unteroffizier Heinz Wodarczyk, making a single strafing run along Sword Beach. Priller later described the mission as suicide disguised as duty. They survived only because Allied fighters were too surprised to react to the lone pair of Focke-Wulf 190s. The Mustang's role extended beyond escort to active fighter bombing. P-51 pilots became adept at train busting, destroying locomotives with their 50 caliber guns. A single Mustang could carry 2 500-pound bombs or 10 5-inch rockets in addition to its guns, making it a formidable ground attack aircraft. Captain Charles Chuck Yeager, who would later break the sound barrier, flew P-51s with the 357th Fighter Group. On October 12, 1944, he shot down 5 Bf-109s in a single mission. But he also described the moral complexity. "We went from protecting bombers to attacking anything that moved. We'd strafe trains, knowing they might be carrying civilians. It was total war, and the Mustang gave us the capability to take that war anywhere in Germany. Germany's technological response came in the form of revolutionary jet fighters, the Messerschmitt Me-262 and the rocket-powered Me-163 Comet. The Me-262, capable of 540 miles per hour, was nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the P-51D. In the hands of experienced pilots, it could slash through bomber formations and escape before Mustangs could react. Yet even these technological marvels couldn't reverse the tide. Adolf Galland, flying an Me-262 with Jagdverband 44 in 1945, shot down 7 aircraft, but recognized the futility. We were like a few tigers facing hundreds of wolves. For every Me-262, the Americans had 50 Mustangs, and Mustangs could loiter over our airfields, attacking jets when they were most vulnerable during takeoff and landing. The jet engines of 1944 to 45 were temperamental, requiring careful throttle management and long runways. Mustang pilots learned to exploit these weaknesses. Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group shot down 2 Me-262s on October 7, 1944, by catching them in the landing pattern. The jets, low on fuel and with throttles reduced for landing, were helpless against the diving Mustangs. By early 1945, the arithmetic of air combat had become impossible for Germany. The United States produced 15,486 P-51s during the war, with approximately 8,000 serving in Europe. At peak strength in March 1945, the 8th Air Force alone operated 14 fighter groups, equipped primarily with Mustangs. Over 1,000 aircraft. Against this, the Luftwaffe could muster perhaps 300 to 400 serviceable fighters on any given day, scattered across the entire Reich. Fuel shortages meant many never flew. Pilot shortages meant those that did were often manned by teenagers with minimal training. The kill ratios reflected this imbalance. By 1945, Mustang pilots were claiming 10 victories for every loss. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer, commanding the 352nd Fighter Group, ended the war with 24 aerial victories, all in Mustangs. He observed, "By 1945, it wasn't combat. It was execution. We'd find German airfields, circle overhead, and shoot down anyone who tried to take off or land. The Mustang had made all of Germany a combat zone." After the war, captured Luftwaffe pilots provided revealing testimony about the Mustang's impact. General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland, in his memoirs, wrote, "The P-51 was perhaps the most significant fighter aircraft of World War II. Until it appeared, we had controlled the timing and tempo of air battles over Germany. After it arrived, we never regained the initiative." Major Heinz Nocker, who survived the war with 33 victories, was more blunt. "The Mustang killed the Luftwaffe. Not the bomber offensive, not the invasion, but that fighter that could fly to Poland and back. We went from predators to prey in the span of 3 months." Perhaps most poignant was the testimony of younger pilots who entered combat late in the war. They flew their first missions with minimal training, facing experienced American pilots in superior aircraft. One captured pilot stated, "I flew my first combat mission in November 1944, with 55 hours total flight time. On my 3rd mission, I saw Mustangs for the first time. They were everywhere. I knew then that we had lost not just the war, but the sky itself." The Mustang's contribution extended far beyond tactical victories. By enabling deep penetration raids with acceptable losses, it allowed the systematic destruction of German industry. Oil production, the Wehrmacht's Achilles heel, was reduced to 10% of requirements by March 1945. The transportation network was shattered, preventing movement of troops, supplies, and raw materials. Aircraft production, though maintained at high levels through dispersal, became meaningless when there was no fuel to fly the planes or trained pilots to man them. General Karl Spaatz, commanding United States strategic air forces in Europe, stated, "The P-51 was the decisive weapon system of the European air war. It made possible the daylight bombing campaign, the invasion of Europe, and the systematic destruction of German military power. Beyond strategic impacts lay profound human transformation. German pilots who had entered combat in 1943 as confident warriors emerged from the war, if they survived, as changed men. Many spoke of specific moments when they realized the war was lost, almost always connected to their first encounter with Mustangs deep over Germany. Some German pilots experienced a different transformation, from enemy to admirer. Many Luftwaffe veterans, after witnessing American material superiority and humane treatment of prisoners, questioned everything they'd been told about their enemies. The contrast between Nazi propaganda and reality proved devastating to morale and ideology alike. The P-51 represented a watershed in fighter design, influencing aircraft development for decades. Its laminar flow wing demonstrated the potential for dramatic drag reduction. The integration of British engine technology with American airframe design established a model for international cooperation that would continue through NATO and other alliances. The Mustang's range achievement changed fundamental assumptions about fighter aircraft. Pre-war doctrine held that fighters were short-range, point defense weapons. The P-51 proved that fighters could be strategic weapons capable of projecting power hundreds of miles from base. This concept would influence everything from the F-86 Sabre in Korea to modern fighters capable of global deployment with aerial refueling. The final statistics of the Mustang's impact are staggering. Total Mustangs produced 15,486. Enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat, Europe, 4,950. Enemy aircraft destroyed on ground, 4,131. Locomotives destroyed, 9,254. Combat sorties flown, 213,873. Combat hours flown, 1,344,420. Operational losses, 2,520. The kill-to-loss ratio in air combat exceeded 11-1, unprecedented in aerial warfare. But the true impact can't be measured in statistics alone. The Mustang broke the Luftwaffe's will to fight, enabled the invasion of Europe, and shortened the war by months, if not years. The transformation from German laughter at unescorted bombers to complete aerial impotence occurred with stunning rapidity. In October 1943, the Luftwaffe controlled the skies over Germany, shooting down bombers at will. By March 1944, Mustangs were escorting bombers to Berlin. By June 1944, the Luftwaffe was combat ineffective. By April 1945, it had ceased to exist as a fighting force. This transformation wasn't gradual. It was catastrophic. The Luftwaffe didn't slowly decline. It collapsed. The appearance of Mustangs deep over Germany triggered a cascade of defeats from which recovery proved impossible. Each lost pilot couldn't be adequately replaced. Each destroyed aircraft reduced training capability. Each successful escort mission emboldened Allied planners to strike deeper, harder, more frequently. German pilot losses tell the story. 1943, 2,967 pilots lost. 1944, 12,037 pilots lost. 1945, January to May, 4,238 pilots lost. Average pilot experience plummeted. 1943, 250-plus flight hours before combat. Early 1944, 150 hours. Late 1944, 80 hours. 1945, 40 to 50 hours. Perhaps the Mustang's greatest achievement was psychological. It shattered the myth of German technological superiority, demonstrated American industrial capability, and proved that democracy could produce better weapons than dictatorship. German pilots who had laughed at American bombers in 1943 were by 1945 refusing to fly suicide missions against Mustang-escorted formations. Young Luftwaffe pilots, indoctrinated in Nazi ideology, experienced cognitive dissonance when confronting American material superiority. Everything they'd been taught about racial superiority, about German technical prowess, about American weakness, was contradicted by the elegant, powerful fighter that dominated their own homeland. In 1985, 40 years after the war's end, American and German fighter pilots met at a reunion in San Antonio, Texas. The conversations revealed the lasting impact of the Mustang on both sides. Colonel Clarence "Bud" Anderson, who flew 116 combat missions in Mustangs and scored 16.25 aerial victories, sat across from Oberst Gunther Roll, Germany's third highest scoring ace. Roll raised his glass and said, "To the P-51 Mustang, the fighter that won the air war. We had excellent aircraft, superb pilots, and were fighting over our homeland. But you had the Mustang, and that made all the difference." Walter Schuck, who had transitioned from Focke-Wulf 190s to Me-2 62 jets, added, "We went from laughing at unescorted bombers to taking cover from Mustangs in just 4 months. No military force has ever experienced such a complete reversal." Former Luftwaffe General Johannes Steinhoff, his face still bearing scars from his Me-2 62 crash in April 1945, reflected, "We laughed at your bombers in 1943 because we could not imagine that America could produce a fighter with the range to escort them to Berlin. The P-51 Mustang taught us the danger of underestimating one's enemies. You ask when we knew the war was lost. It was that day in March 1944 when we looked up and saw Mustangs over Berlin. At that moment, every German pilot knew the truth. We had already lost." In the end, the story teaches timeless lessons about warfare, technology, and human hubris. The danger of underestimating one's enemies, the power of industrial democracy, and the transformative impact a single weapon system can have on the course of history. The Mustang proved that in modern industrial warfare, courage and skill, while necessary, are not sufficient. Victory belongs to those who can produce the most, train the best, and innovate the fastest. The transformation was complete, irreversible, devastating. The laughter had become silence. The confident German fighter pilots of October 1943, men who believed they controlled the skies, who thought they understood the limits of American capability, who were certain their sanctuary beyond escort range was inviolable, discovered in the span of 4 months that every assumption was wrong. They learned that technological superiority can shift with stunning speed, that industrial capacity matters more than individual courage, that underestimating democratic nations at war is a fatal mistake. The P-51 Mustang had written its name across the skies of Europe as the fighter that ended the Luftwaffe's dominance, and with it, Nazi Germany's hopes for victory. From Black Thursday in October 1943, when German pilots laughed at unescorted American bombers struggling through flak and fighters, to March 1944, when those same pilots looked up in horror at Mustangs over Berlin, the arc of transformation was complete. The hunters had become the hunted. The confident had become the desperate. The laughter had died in their throats, and the long-range fighter that made it all possible, designed by Americans, powered by a British engine, and produced in numbers that overwhelmed German defences, became the symbol of how the Second World War was truly won, not just through bravery, not just through sacrifice, but through innovation, cooperation, and the industrial might of free nations working together toward a common goal, the P-51 Mustang, the fighter that ended German laughter. The aircraft that changed everything, and the weapon system that proved once and for all that in total war, the nation that can innovate fastest and produce most will ultimately prevail, no matter how confident their enemies may be at the start.